moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And it was President Reagan, in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's the military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam, so that we can go beat the Soviet Union.
Hello, good evening. One of NATO's key allies in Libya, the leader of military forces in Tripoli, has alleged he was kidnapped and interrogated by the CIA and then turned over to Gaddafi. Abdul Hakim Belhaj claims he spent 6 years in prison for what the CIA claimed were his links to Al-Qaeda. More, Peter.
Well, there's more light being shed on the dark side of the war on terror, that's for sure. 30 years ago, of course, Islamist fighting groups were America's great friends, fighting the good fight against the Russians in Afghanistan. 10 years ago, that all changed with the war on terror, and the enemy's enemy, Colonel Gaddafi, became the great friend. And now that's all changed again, and we've got a former jihadist leading the fight against Gaddafi's forces in Tripoli.
Showing as an asset, as a former asset, I have extremely good ties and knowledge and depth of resources inside Libya today. What I'm finding is the video documentation that NATO rebels are actually the same Al-Qaeda fighters that we've been dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan, who've now come home to Libya.
Libya's revolution. Tim Huell is in Benghazi for us.
This young man I interviewed alongside his father earlier this year in the eastern city of Derna is one of hundreds who were jailed after fighting abroad against America. Though like most others, he says he wouldn't do that again.
For the first time on this show, Ambassador Chris Stevens' body being found by looters and later dragged through the streets of Benghazi following the shootout and the storming of our consulate there.
Unconfirmed. Yes, we came, we saw, he died. Military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam, so that we can go to act. French planes were the first to reach the skies over Benghazi. Cruise missiles from the United States and the United Kingdom followed, striking the regime's air defenses and clearing the way for Allied aircraft to implement the no-fly zone.
Suddenly everything's changed. The rebel force which took Tripoli is now the de facto army of the new Libya. The man who led them is Abdul Hakim Belhaj. But the hero of this revolution, championed by NATO and America, again, and we've got a former jihadist leading the fight against Gaddafi's forces in Tripoli. Military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam, so that we can go.
We have shifted. I'm amazed. I'm so disappointed in Obama that he is actually shifting resources to finance Al-Qaeda rebels and to provide U.S. enforcement of the Al-Qaeda presence in Libya. Now, I just want to tell you, I want to tell your viewers, we have video documentation that is coming from refugees fleeing the rebel strongholds, and they're bringing out video from their camera phones that they're recording just on the spot. Videos of beheadings, videos of castration.
This young man I interviewed alongside his father earlier this year in the eastern city of Derna is one of hundreds who were jailed after fighting abroad against America. Though like most others, he says he wouldn't do that again.
For the first time on this show, Ambassador Chris Stevens' body being found by looters and later dragged through the streets of Benghazi following the shootout and the storming of our consulate there.
Unconfirmed. Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Consulate there. Now what you're seeing, a still photo captured of that horrific moment. Now you can also make out that this photo has a bloody gash right there. You can see it on Stevens' head. Now, in light of these breaking developments about the coordinated nature of the attack and now seeing the reality of what our ambassador went through, it is becoming more and more clear that this White House was misleading you, the American people, in the wake of this tragedy. Now, they first denied that it was a terror attack. Now they say it was an obvious terror attack. We have a president dodging questions yesterday about the lack of security at the consulate, and a UN ambassador has been caught on camera blatantly lying about what caused the incident.
Muammar Gaddafi clearly lost the confidence of his own people and the legitimacy to lead.
And that's what I want to hear about, because we just heard Obama today say that Gaddafi essentially is a terrorist, and the U.S. is abiding by the UN mandate to fight that. So what do you see as the reality, and what evidence do you have that it is al-Qaeda that is, amongst these rebels?
Well, first of all, I was directly involved in the 1990s operation to get terrorists out of Libya. And I can assure you that all terrorists were removed from Libya by about 1998, 1999. Since then, Gaddafi, by the way, was the first government to inform Interpol about Osama bin Laden. Gaddafi is hated by Islamist fundamentalists because he is a socialist Muslim, and he has a very different agenda that is not Sharia. Gaddafi has a very strong record on women's rights. Women have the right to education, hold property, divorce, hold jobs, have income, many rights that other women in the Arab world do not have. So he is a moderate, and he is not involved in any terrorism at all. That is absolutely foolishness.
So the military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go
merged with al-Qaeda. Go back to 1995, the David Shaler affair. This was a defector, a whistleblower from MI5, who said that MI6 had paid a al-Qaeda organization in Libya 100,000 pounds to try to kill Gaddafi. And that was linked to the last insurrection in 95-96, precisely from Benghazi and Tobruk.
So if al-Qaeda is enemies with Gaddafi, does that make, in this situation, al-Qaeda our friends?
Absolutely not. Suppose you get these crazies, because that's the only way to put it, psychotics, fanatics, misfits, terrorists, whatever they are. You're going to give them modern arms. You're going to give them a slice of those $32 billion. You're going to give them the oil revenue. They'll create a terrorist power that will go wild across the world. Governments around the world need to ask the United States, what are you doing arming and promoting al-Qaeda fighters in those areas of Libya?
And so on. So the real fear of the West is that Africa unites and is able to break free from this colonial grip that it's been in for hundreds of years. And who was the leading force behind uniting Africa was Libya under Gaddafi's rule. So Gaddafi was the main driving force behind founding the African Union in 2002, and his country was the main financial contributor to the three main big financial institutions of the African Union: the African Central Bank, the Investment Bank, and the African Monetary Fund. Between them, they would have posed a huge challenge to IMF hegemony, International Monetary Fund hegemony of Africa, and a huge, the currency that Libya was proposing, gold-backed dinar, would have been a huge challenge to the role of the dollar, pound, and the franc as the main currencies in Africa. So all of this is threatening it's a threat to Africa's subordinate position in the global economy.
Okay, let's just military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go
I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
We came, We saw. He died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? Oh, I'm sure it did.
Britain, France and the US have turned Libya into a bloodbath. At least 50,000 people were killed during the attack, and since then the country's been turned into a patchwork of rival militias fighting out for territory and condemning the country to decades of violence and trauma. The information we were given to justify the war, we now know, is a total pack of lies. There was no mass rape by Gaddafi's soldiers. There were no 10,000 peaceful protesters slaughtered by Gaddafi's soldiers. In fact, we now know there was no mass protest movement. What there was an armed insurgency by long-standing British proxies combined with lynch mob terror against the black Libyan population. The only mercenaries to be involved in the conflict were on NATO's side. The only aerial bombardment in the conflict, real or threatened, was by NATO. This is now all well known, well documented and written about extensively.
In other words, what has happened in the course of these last few months, and particularly in the last few weeks, is the destruction of an entire country, of its infrastructure, its institutions, very targeted, lots of civilian casualties. In other words, the Western pro-democracy, NATO-supported rebels, as well as NATO's heads of state and heads of government, they have blood on their hands. They have a lot of blood on their hands because they've killed a lot of men, women and children.
Moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
The U.S. has admitted that the aid which they have been sending towards the Syrian rebels actually does not end up in the hands of the groups which they were hoping it would end up in. And quite on the contrary, the United States officials are now saying that, in fact, the money that they keep sending over, which then goes towards the purchasing of arms, which end up in the hands of the Islamist extremist groups. The arms are being purchased by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which have a tendency to prefer the radical movements, such as the Salafis, who then end up with these top-notch, extremely expensive weapons, which they then use against the troops of President Bashar al-Assad.
Military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam, so that we can go be
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed religious.
We came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
Oh, I'm sure it did.